and basically blew the whistle, and he blew it all up. But FDR's hands were tied because these guys own all of the industry in America. We're coming out of the Great Depression. He's just trying to run the New Deal, and he's like. And I come back to this point a lot, that the reason intelligence agencies were founded first by Bill Donovan in the United States with the OSS, corporate lawyer.
Bill Donovan.
Right? And second by Allen Dulles, largely in the U.S., corporate lawyer for Sullivan and Cromwell. And a lot of people don't know what corporate lawyers are, and they don't think about them ever in their whole lives. But if you wanted to found an intelligence agency with the least amount of inputs to get the most amount of outputs, you would choose a corporate lawyer. Because when you hire a single high-level corporate lawyer, you've hired one man, and that man's network is all the CEOs of all the biggest mega corporations all around the world that do all the shadiest shit. Because those are the ones that need the best corporate lawyers to protect them from all the lawsuits that they would get if they were actually going to face consequences for overthrowing the government of Guatemala and overthrowing the government of Iran, and right? And so when Allen Dulles founded the CIA, the traditional narrative is that he was for the intelligence, he's the founder of the intelligence agency and he visionary man, whatever bullshit. There's plenty of evidence when you read through his history, read through the documentation, read through his words and everyone else's words, that he was kind of founding those intelligence agencies, the CIA, that intelligence agency, on behalf of his corporate buddies, because suddenly they have government sanctioned muscle, right? And that plausible deniability is baked into that cake because a lot of those corporate connections then get utilized in that intelligence network. And so when you need to say ship some illegal guns or ship some illegal drugs, you happen to know a dude that has a shipping company or an airplane line that you can just spin off into, a little shell company, spin it up for a little operation over in Laos or down in Venezuela or down in, Nicaragua. And then when it's all done, just close that up, wash your hands, and everybody goes their own way.
And also a guy like that, though, too, you're talking about history that goes back to the fucking Treaty of Versailles.
Oh, yeah.
He's involved
in that. He literally
was
was one of the writers.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's like an American corporate lawyer doing this fucking end of World War I treaty that indirectly caused World War II.
Very much.
Or you could say directly.
Oh, it very much dictated the state of the European banking and the German versus Russian relationship, the German versus Europe. There's a whole dark conspiracy around that I don't feel confident is true for sure, but it sure felt like they gutted.
Oh, there's some weird shit.
It sure felt like they intentionally gutted Germany with the Treaty of Versailles so that because Germany is a wealth of industrial power. They have amazing resources, amazing industrial capacity, but no one really felt comfortable with the German people being in charge of it, right?
Yeah.
And they wanted their hands on it. And so the Treaty of Versailles hollows that all out, and then everyone comes in and buys it out on the cheap.
And then he and all his corporate buddies make friends with the incoming
Nazis. And then they build up the incoming Nazis.
Yep.
And then they try to overthrow the fucking government of the United States of America with Smedley Butler in the business plot.
Yeah, can you explain this to people?
Oh my God. Most people do not realize that in the lead up to World War II in the 30s, when FDR was president, Prescott Bush, the father of H.W. Bush.
The best Bush.
Yeah, the big daddy Bush. Him and all of his corporate buddies, he's just a fun scapegoat for it because the Bush family is worth looking into their ties there. The Skull and Bones connections and all that.
Skull and Bones is a great organization.
It's fraternal organization.
They do amazing things over there. They help a lot of people.
Thank you, Yale. Prescott Bush and all of his buddies were deeply financially tied to the Nazis. Fritz Thielsen, I think is the guy's name, that was in charge of all the steel over there. All these different guys had all these different industries basically bankrolling the German miracle, right? Which is let's be clear. Money doesn't grow on trees. It doesn't miraculously spring out of the ground in Germany. Germany, they did do probably some amazing rebuilding of their nation from the Weimar Republic into this whatever. But a lot of that is money flowing in from the outside from these global capitalists that bought it all up and fueled that rise. And I'm starting to suspect that Hitler was intentionally their guy and he was just the right amount of crazy for them to be that one.
There's a case there,
right? Because
how
his party was not that big,
yeah.
at first, right? And I am not the most educated on it, and it is deeply complex to research history that far back and that propagandized. But money flowed in at a certain point, and he rose, and he was just crazy enough to be eastward expansionist towards the Reds.
Yes,
but that was originally his only plan, as far as I'm aware. And while he was doing all that, they're funding all that, and they're licking their chops to make money off of that war all over again, right? And they did wind up making a lot of money off of World War II on both sides. But all those Nazis, back to the business plot, Prescott Bush and his buddies in America had a large-scale plan to use veterans, American servicemen, veterans, to overthrow FDR's government in America and install a fascist regime that was essentially Nazis. There was huge Nazi rallies in America with swastikas and everything. And they had it all planned out to the letter. And Smedley Butler was their guy. He's the most decorated Marine at the time in U.S. history. Hero to all Marines. And they were going to have him lead it. And they came to him and they offered it to him. And he played along long enough to get documentation on it. And then he went to FDR and said, look what they're going to do, right? And basically blew the whistle. And he blew it all up. But FDR's hands were tied because these guys own all of the industry in America. We're coming out of the Great Depression. He's just, trying to run the New Deal. And he's like, I can't fucking go after them. Like, and I'm not sure if the like urban legend that might be documented. I don't know. I've not read the documentation of it. But the story is that FDR went to them and was like, fuck you guys. And they were like, no, fuck you. If you come for us, we'll just crash your economy all over again. We'll destroy your country.
Leverage.
Right? And so he couldn't do anything. Nothing ever happened to them. And it just all went away. But there's a whole Wikipedia page on it. And then there's a whole bunch of sources that you can read about it for days. It's not secret. Just no one knows about it.
It's crazy how much FDR, because, he's president for like 15 years or whatever. And he comes in at the height of the Great Depression beginning and then lives through all these years that eventually works his way into this world war. He had, learning about his life more and more, he had to navigate so many backroom, like off the record, we can't talk about that kind of things, not just in this country, but internationally as well.
Internationally.
And somehow was still able to like keep America afloat, and there's questions with kicking the can down the road right there with programs he put in for sure.
Yep.
I can go the gold standard just to begin on that. But tough situation for him to take over, and then is able to be the leader in World War II, which ended up being good for us in the sense that he was someone who did defer to the generals, which I think was very important in that being litigated. But you're raising a really important point here in that it all just comes back to they were just business ties that were advantageous. And so business wants to pay off what? Politicians, as they always do. That would include world leaders in any place. If this guy's useful, then fuck it. Because eventually when we had to get pulled into World War II after Hitler declares war on us after Pearl Harbor and all that, these guys were more or less like the Dulleses were like, all right, okay, all right, we'll go to war. But they weren't like, all right, let's go kill some Nazis. They were much more concerned about communism in the USSR. And to your point, if you look at the history, like the bad history of like CIA and shit like that, it always leans on the fascist direction, not the communist direction.
Yep. And I suspect, and there's lots of documentation to support this, so bankers went international back in like the 1700s. Mm-hmm. And like, hate to say it, but the Rothschilds were the poster children of that.
Didn't the Medicis kind of do some shit though in the 14th century that
I am not as educated about the Medicis because it's just such a deep dig and it's way back. But there's these banking families, right?
Yeah.
And so banking families have started to realize that like if we have banks in different areas, especially in different nations, and the Rothschilds makes a lot of sense because they were Jewish in a time when they were somewhat, depending on the nation at the time, and it's very complicated history, they were not welcome in all places and they were not welcome in all trades. And so the Rothschilds naturally wound up with with their family spanning many nations, owning large banks in many nations. And somewhere around the Napoleonic Wars, they're starting to fund both sides of wars a little bit and profit off of both sides a little bit. And all the rest of the bankers are starting to realize like, oh, that's a fucking good idea. Right. And by the time World War I rolls around, like, I don't know how to like,
every bank in the world's involved in that.
Exactly, right? And so you start to have like the international banking cartel at large, and I'm not saying that they're all Jewish. Let's just clarify, right? The international banking cartel at large is starting to realize like we can fund both sides of every war, and that'll be dope. And I think from World War I onwards, that's basically like the program.
That's
like,
what happens
globally,
today
right?
with all your mainstream companies and everything. When you talk about the military-industrial complex, it starts with the banking.
Yep, and then that gets it sort of gets leveled down and leveled down and leveled down. And now you have this sort of like rebuild capitalism, disaster capitalism, where it's like, oh, we can make money off of the rebuild of Iraq, not just and let's be clear, Iraq was not the first time they did that. It was just the first time in my life that we saw it. Yes. And so there's like layers and layers to capitalists, corrupt capitalists, to be clear, realizing that they can profit off of all the evils in this world even more so than all the good in this world in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
right? Far more profitable to have war. And the problem is that once World War I ends and all of these bankers have all of this money coming in and their profit incentive, like their fiduciary duty
Yes.
is to keep the checks flowing. How are you going to keep the checks flowing when, last year you had, $40 billion, I'm making up numbers, but in profit off of all these arms and bombs and endless destruction of because everything that gets destroyed has to get rebuilt, and it had to get built in the first place. And so suddenly your bottom line just vanishes. It's like, well, how do we start the next war?
Right.
Right.
There was this guy, Henry Abbott. You ever hear of him?
Yeah, I might be confusing the Abbott part with other Abbotts because there's like there's a couple.
He's a modern day journalist who is a sports journalist, actually.
Oh, I don't think I know about him.
All right, so he ran this blog. I used to read this like years ago called True Hoop. I think it was still called True Hoop when it was with ESPN, and then ESPN laid off like the whole company, and so he took it off on his own. And I want to say he put on Substack or something like that, where it was behind a paywall. So he starts this investigation, like maybe this is 4 or 5 years ago, where the NBA had been purchased. A few teams had been purchased by guys with ties to Apollo Global. And so, obviously, Apollo Global, Leon Black funded Jeffrey Epstein to the tune of $257 million in the last 5
Was
6
alleged
years.
of having a Down syndrome child.
I don't even remember that. Maybe
Yeah.
I read that at
Real
some point.
scumbag.
That's crazy.
Yeah, there's mainstream reporting about that one.
Yeah. Do we have good evidence on that kind of thing? I mean, that's a crazy.
It's
that's sick.
tough to say. And I would have to be looking at the article to recall just how solid the evidence on it is. But it was widely alleged in mainstream reporting, at least. I can say that for sure.
Either way,
Real piece of shit.
A guy that seems certainly like a piece of shit even before an accusation like that. But so Leon Black, obviously in charge of the company, a few of his guys, co-founders, people that were involved, the Sixers are owned by Josh Harris, who actually I want to give Josh Harris some props on this. He was supposed to take over the company from Leon Black. He was a co-founder. He was always going to be the guy who took it back, and he got pushed out because when the Epstein stuff came out, he was like, "What the fuck? Like, we're not doing this." So I have to give Josh credit on that for sure.
Hard to walk away from something like that over morals.
There were other teams. The Atlanta Hawks was one of them. Maybe there was one other as well that were involved. And so Henry found some sort of thread between Apollo vis-a-vis Leon Black and Epstein. And long story short, he pulls on this thread and suddenly ends up writing this like 25 section. They're all like chapters, like full-blown chapters. Section on like tying everything together, going all the way back to like Prescott Bush. And oh yeah,
I want to read that.
No, you gotta go. Read. It's
shit.
I've never seen him go and talk about it on shit before.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe he has.
Get him in
but
here, dude.
We should. It's incredible reporting, and when you see this, and you're putting these names together, and his sourcing was actually like really good too. And he was like trying to be careful with like, all right, well, could this go to that? Could this go to that? And he would explore it like each topic by topic. Like, he's got a chapter called like Steve Bannon.
Yeah.
And you read that, you're like, oh, holy shit,
Juicy.
right? And then he's got a section called like Dulles in World War II and stuff like that. And you realize all of it in some way, even if we don't know exactly where it lands, it does tie together.
Yep.
And there's no way to say at this point, to go back to the original point we were making here, there's no way you can possibly look at the Epstein case and say, oh, that had nothing to do with an intelligence service.
Exactly.
Of course it did. And I appreciate, I guess, like Whitney's clarification on like the semantics around it.
Yeah.
But depending on whatever one it was, my belief is that it was associated with Mossad. Either way, like there's some serious access going on with powerful people who are being put in the most horrible positions, some cases because they want to be, other cases because they get trapped. And this guy's at the middle of all of it. And also, by the way, maniacally careless about his own sick deprivations along the way of doing it. Like he didn't even try to cover up the fact that he was like doing disgusting things.
Yeah. And then he got let off the first time he got caught, and that just emboldened him more, I think. And And it's important to clarify too that it's like, yeah, he was tied most directly to Israeli intelligence. And when you look at his network, it's all Jewish billionaires whose whole lives are devoted to Israel for the most part. Like Leslie Wexner being a prime example,
His
Ehud
closest
Barak
network.
being
Yeah.
his close network of highest level like benefactors and bosses, so to speak.
Thank you guys for checking out this clip. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. It is a huge, huge help. And if you'd like to check out this clip's full podcast episode, that link is in the description below or right here. And finally, you can follow me on Instagram and X by using the links in my description below.